Hello everyone, it's me again. Again, I say because this is the second part of a video I made a few time ago about Season 2 of The Walking Dead game. How I'd improve it on the story standpoint, taking base upon left out details in the game, cut content, and little theories / fanfic of mine. If you haven't watched it yet, go see that one and then come back later for this video here. Links will be in the description. Last video, if you remember well, the only episode that I really proposed more substantial changes was episode 3, and even then, I feel like that episode haven't been changed as much as I'd change episodes 4 and 5. Here's a quick reminder on what I would alter so far. So, in episode 2, Kenny could potentially carry Doug's drawing inside his pocket, and even be brought up back in episode 3. Mike and Ralph would be a single character, and we would meet him at house. We'd also have a chance to interact more with the 400 Days characters as I settled a whole workday with them. I give more importance to Shell and Wyatt above Vince and Russell because I thought they fit better the story. Shell would have something to do with the massacre at the river shore, having a little connection to Roman, whose corpse we see lying there in the river shore, and Wyatt's importance would be revealed only now in episode 4 Amid the Ruins. You'll get what I'm saying later on. Since I didn't say it in the previous video, I'd like to make something clear. I absolutely love Season 2, alright? It is actually my favorite one out of the 4. However, on terms of execution, I put it only above A New Frontier because it had many missteps during its development, especially in the second half of the season, as it seems they were rewriting things as they go on. In the end, I find it still a really good result, an emotional and memorable season that faithfully follows its predecessors, that being Season 1. I make my few critics here to state the point of the whole thing. It could have been perfect, or at least way better than it got to be. I personally think that from the starting points we had with the season, this here could have been better than the final season, and I dare to say, better even than Season 1. In the end of the day, I'm but a guy on YouTube making videos, and I can't be very wrong. I'll now leave you with the video so you can judge it for yourselves. Also, a quick reminder that in this video I'll only talk about episode 4 Amid the Ruins, and on the next video I'll talk about episode 5, so the videos won't be that long. Without any further ado, let's get into it. Episode 4, Amid the Ruins, despite shocking moments and deaths, despite Jane's and Kenny's amazing presence, and even despite AJ being born, as far as I see, is actually the worst executed episode of this season. People normally say that it can be really slow at some points, and I get that. However, that's not the worst thing about this episode. The slow aspect, it's actually something important and necessary for this point of the story, at least in my opinion. Analyzing it from a narrative perspective, this episode has the objective of being an aftermath for the events of episode 2, there were plenty actually, at the same time that it has to build up the story for the finale, that being episode 5. And it can be boring sometimes, not gonna lie. However, that's definitely not the issue of the episode for me. The biggest problem is how it deals with the choices we make alongside the game. Well, completely disregarding them and frustrating the players. Really, what's the difference of stealing Arvo's medicine or not if he's gonna ditch us to his Russian buddies anyway? What's the point of leaving in the morning or waiting a few days to leave after AJ's born? What's the point of choosing between Bonnie, Mike, and Jane if all events will happen the same way despite the order you pick? Why cut off Sarita's arm or not if she'll have 0 to none screen time after that? And finally, what was the point of saving Sarah at the trailer park if she was going to die minutes later and do nothing in this meantime. Also, a big problem I have with this episode. Arvo is a terrible character. Most people might agree with this, mainly because he shoots Clementine in episode 5, but I dislike him because of how terribly crafted this character is. And in this revision of the season, he'd be cut from the story. The character, not its role, however. You see, Arvo play a really important role in the later episodes. The channel In Cold Blood, the one I mentioned in my previous video, has a whole video just talking about how Arvo's role should have originally been played by no one other than Eddie, Wyatt's friend from the 400 Days DLC. This video is so good, and I totally buy this character replacement, but I'll talk more on that later. So let's begin, alright? We start off right after we decided to cut off Sarita's arm or not. In the game, if you cut it, she'll die right there in the middle of the herd. If you don't, she leaves the herd with Kenny and Mike. In my new pick, she'd walk out of the herd regardless of what you choose. Kenny would be very mad at you for cutting her arm, and if you don't, he'd just be worried about her. Nick would also get shot, like we already see it happening, and we'd escape from the herd with Rebecca and Jane exactly like we do already. When meeting Bonnie, Mike, Kenny, and Sarita at the Civil War Memorial statue, things would go on fairly like it does already if you choose not to cut Sarita's arm. In here, the conversation with Kenny wouldn't be stupid like it is in the game. You know, he won't blame us regardless of what we did. If you choose to cut off her arm, people would be really anxious, trying to fix Sarita's arm, patching it up with clothes or whatever they could find. Kenny here would be really agitated, and if we tried to get any closer to him and Sarita, he'd blame us for it. It makes way more sense if he blames us only if we cut off her arm. We then set out to find Luke, Sarah, and Nick, potentially, alongside Jane. For the whole trailer park scene, I change only one thing. Nick. People really complain about this death happening off screen, and it was a really hated thing they did. Me personally, I don't hate it, but it definitely could have been better. What I do here would be for us to have a little moment of goodbye with him. You know, he was shot. He could have been potentially bitten. I don't know, anything that leaves him lying there, waiting for his death. I thought here, the possibility for a dialogue with him, potentially mentioning Pete, the uncle he loved so much, creating a sad moment of farewell. Then finally, we could put him down. The rest of the scene, where we get to convince Sarah or not to leave, I'd put it the same way here, for I find it a good moral challenging choice. Returning to the monument, we'd head straight to Kenny inside the shack. In the shack, there'd be two possible scenarios. One that Sarita has been put down by Kenny. This would happen if you don't cut her arm. And the other if you do cut it, and that would be her resting with her arm precariously patched, but still alive. Yes, Sarita would make it past this scene. I'd also add a dialogue option to talk to Luke about Nick being dead, because, well, really, Nick was a really developed character and he deserves it. After that, we'd have to go with Mike and Bonnie to the museum, or with Jane to the observatory. In the game, you can make both stuff, and there's no real difference if you pick one before the other. Here, you'd only pick one thing to do, and there was going to be a little difference on the events if you picked one or the other. In the game, before your choice, Bonnie says she could really use her help at the museum, but also tells her to keep an eye on Jane, so she won't just silently run away from them. In this new scenario that I propose, Bonnie would be worried about the possibility of Mike betraying them, If you remember well from the last video, Mike and Ralph, one of the guys who attacked Krista on the woods, would still be a single character, and he would have joined our group after we escaped from house. So for the choice, we'd be divided between having Bonnie back up on a potential betrayal, or assuring Jane doesn't flee for good. This definitely adds weight to this choice, which in the game has no difference besides the little dialogue changes. Going with Mike and Bonnie would go on exactly like it does in the game, with Mike trying his best to atone himself and be better accepted by the group. A little detail that happens in the game, but has no reason to be there whatsoever. Now, going with Jane would have many changes. It would all start with Clem and Jane checking out the observatory like they do already, looking at the door, the city across the river and stuff, when then, in the distance, we see a hooded person approaching the observatory, holding a heavy duffel bag we hide, and he makes his way up trying to hide the bag inside the trash can. He turns to face us, and under the hood we see Eddie from the 400 Days DLC. To solve the situation, I wanted to implement a little dynamic here, where Eddie, instead of leaving with or without the medicine, as Arvo does in the game, he'd join our group. We could argue him to help us, or we could threaten him to do so. To illustrate my proposal, I'd like to remind you guys how we got Vernon to help us with Omid's leg in Season 1. You can either threaten him or reason with him. With Eddie here, it wouldn't be different. If we choose to go with Mike and Bonnie, Jane would appear with Eddie already under her custody, and if we pick Jane, Bonnie would get her face injury no matter what. Eddie would be introduced to the group and everyone would make use of his medicine. Rebecca for her pregnancy pain, Luke for injuries from Carver's beating, Sarita potentially for her chopped off arm, Bonnie and Clementine for their potential cuts on their faces, and Kenny for his mashed eyeball. A little detail I'd like to point out is that the moment we changed Kenny's bandages was originally going to happen on episode 4, as the preview for Amid the Ruins indicated it, even with the same dialogue option between Clem and Kenny we have on episode 5. So this scene was originally made to play on episode 4 instead of 5. We'd have a whole scene patching everyone up, where I'd add more dialogue here. We could check on the armless Sarita, potentially. We could check on a disturbed Sarah, a friendly Mike demonstrating he's hardworking on the group's acceptance, and Eddie, maybe asking him a few questions about how he acquired that medicine, and he'd be remorseful about it. Well, maybe because he'd stole it from someone. I don't know, maybe. Anyway, during this, Luke and Jane would go to the observatory to have their little lovemaking session. Then Rebecca enters labor, and the whole group goes up there. Clementine, Kenny, Bonnie, Mike, Eddie, and potentially Sarah and Sarita. Don't forget about her. Right here, when they make their way up and the walkers are breaching in, would be the perfect moment for Sarah's gun teaching lesson to be important. When defending the deck from the walkers, if we taught Sarah how to shoot in episode 2, we'd give her a weapon to help us out, and she'd snap out of her panic attack and shoot a few of the walkers on the other side of the fence. When the deck goes down, Sarah would also fall. Furthermore, the gun we potentially gave her would fall close to her, and she'd grab it, trying to clear a bit of the walkers, while Jane could go down and try to save her. With Sarah shooting a few of the zombies from below, and Bonnie shooting them from above, Jane would be able to take Sarah out of there and bring her back up. If we pull Jane back up, Sarah would die despite teaching her how to shoot or not. After the whole thing, AJ is born and we take a nap. After that, Jane would potentially leave. I say potentially because in the game she'll leave us no matter what. Here we could allure her to stay with us, you know, since she comes back in episode 5 either way. This little change would give the player the sensation of more control over the choices he makes. Also, one of the reasons Jane leaves is because of Sarah's death, and that being determinant now would also change a little of her motivation to leave. Now, the choice of either leaving in the morning or waiting a few days for it, I'd also put differences here. Remember in season 1, right after we meet Clementine and we have to decide between leaving while it's day or wait until night? So, both choices lead you to Herschel's farm, no matter what. However, while it's day, you'll go with Sean and Chet on a pickup truck, and during night, you'll go with Sean and Andrew, the police officer, while Chet will have turned into a walker. My point is that here, both choices would end up in the same place, that being a crazy shootout in the middle of the snow, but there'd be a few differences regarding each of the choices. What happens in the game is that Arvo and his Russian gang show up and ambushes our group. In Cold Blood's video about Amid the Ruins, he says that instead of random Russians showing up, the ambushers should have been what remained from Carver's people at House. Yes, I agree with this. House people, including the rest of the 400 Days cast, should be in here. However, I find it really important to have a third party here. By that, I mean a group who originally owned the stash of medicine that Eddie stole from them. In the game, the Russians already decently play the source of origin of the medicine, whereas it functions as a source of threat. And in my opinion, I'd still put a potential group to threaten us. Russians were the pick of the writers, but it could be anything else. But now you might be asking, wait, haven't you mentioned the remains of Carver's group? Why are you talking about the people aside from them if you said you'd also put them here? Let me explain this. The plotline of the scene in the game is basically this. A group trying to take their stolen things back from us with two sides to this conflict. Us and the enemy. In this new version, I'd not only put two sides, but three. Those being our group, the guys who are after Eddie and their stolen medicine, and the people from House. Just imagine how insane this scene would have been if we had a straight out war scenario with three different groups where there'd be actual stakes, because on episode 5, little to nothing happens to our group from this shootout. Luke and Mike are injured, but that's it. No one dies aside of our enemies. So how would this happen, you might ask? Well, let's go back to the choice on whether leaving the observatory at sunrise or a few days later. Depending on the choice or the other, you'd meet one of the two foe groups first. Now, I might be going arbitrary here, but my take is that if you leave in the morning, you'll bump on House crew first. They were on a region, therefore they could have been more likely to find in a smaller period of time. And if you leave a few days after, you'd bump on the group chasing Eddie and his medicine. Just a reminder, Rebecca's bleeding after labor condition would be the same, and her becoming a walker would also be the flaming spark of this war. Meeting one group or the other first would be giving us the chance to negotiate with them, trying to amend things. If we'd bumped on House people first, a really decisive factor would be Wyatt recognizing Eddie, making a situation where neither side wants to kill each other, like in Cold Blood pointed out in his video. The discussion would happen so until the other group would find us and things would get intense. Gunpoint everywhere, big confusion, people demanding explanations, and we'd have to deal with Rebecca turning right in front of us. The shot being ours, Bonnie's, or Kenny's, would create the chaos and the episode would end, creating the biggest cliffhanger in the existence of this franchise. And that's it for the video today, guys. There was actually a lot to cover from Amid the Ruins. As I said, this is the weakest episode from the season and needed lots of changes. I hope I could make it up to the episode mistakes and at least create a better story than the game already presents. But what do you think? Leave your thoughts on the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe on the channel for more of the Walking Dead videos like this. The next and last part of the video covering episode 5 will be coming soon. I don't know how soon, but it will come eventually. Thanks a lot and bye.
Dude, you better go up and see Bill.